We all know I'm a hopeless rambler in these video game reviews, but let me make a vain attempt at adhering to a structure for once. I want to talk about the political backdrop for this DLC, something I only touched on slightly in my Wild Hunt review, the characters, and finally, who or what the heck Gaunter Odim is. I'm especially interested in that last bullet, as I think you might be as well. And somewhere in all of that, hopefully a review with actual criticisms and praise of this DLC will materialize. But probably I'll just end up rambling once again. Let's get started. In the Wild Hunt, almost every major character, and the NPCs as well, wandering around the swamps of Velen and the streets of Novigrad and Oxenfurt, and pretty much every locale you travel to, are clearly modeled after real-world white Europeans. Now, they are certainly distinct populations of people with their own customs, traditions, and cultures, but all in all, it is what I would call, quote, Tolkien diversity, unquote, with white dwarves, white elves, white halflings, white humans, and so on. They're all living amongst or in close proximity to each other. Now, we're talking about Tolkien's books here, mind you, when I say Tolkien diversity, not the more often than not awful on-screen adaptations. Let's just be clear about that. The beings of the Northern Kingdoms and Nilfgaard all, quote, evolved, unquote, for lack of a better way to put it, in the same high-latitude regions of the world, so biologically speaking, of course, they will share the same fair-skin phenotype and general adaptations to their common environments. Upon closer inspection or at a more fine-grained level, however, they will undoubtedly have their own particular and peculiar practices and allegiances to their own kindred and kind, and so inevitable tribal tensions will arise between the different groups. But these are differences which they are all aware of and accustomed to, and for the most part they are able to navigate them without undue strife or conflict. Of course, there are times of difficulty and prejudice, and if leaders with extreme agendas, like Radovid or Emir, take over, things get bloody and violent quite quickly. But usually, even in times of war, which is what The Witcher 3 takes place in, the day-to-day peace is maintained between different groups, if somewhat shakily. Again, not unlike Europe itself in the real world, for what I imagine are reasons we all understand and we don't have to get into here. Hearts of Stone introduces into this familiar, well-trodden ethnic mix a destabilizing foreign racial element, however, which right from the start throws Geralt's life, and we eventually come to learn, Olgierd von Everic's life as well, completely out of whack. The unknown other has arrived, and the chaos that ensues enables some rather dark, or dare I say, elite, forces to gain a foothold in Geralt's world, one of which is, of course, Gaunter Odim. Now, we've met him before in the White Orchard Inn, where he expressed clear interest in the fates of both Geralt and Yennefer, but seemingly their struggles were not quite desperate enough yet for him to step in and try to take over. When the Ophiri, with their own harsh rules and capital punishments, take Geralt captive with the apparent intention of hanging him, Gaunter sees his chance and does not hesitate. So too is the case with Olgierd, when his unhappy wife is to be married off to an Ophiri prince. Not only does Olgierd resort to conjuring an abominable curse on the prince, but he also makes a pact with Gaunter to keep his cherished family and wealth and estate intact, only to have his love for these things wither in his heart, and for them to become a wearying toil and burden to him. Unwittingly, he also exposes Geralt to the wrath of an Ophiri monarch, who will almost certainly execute the Witcher for killing his cursed and mutated son. Such are the cascading calamities set in motion by multiculturalism enriching the hillsides and villages of Velen. Now, it's not all bad. There are, of course, the wonderful variety of restaurants and cuisine.
Our midst tell of a time when love brought together the skies and the steppe, and from their union was born the first mare. Weak were the creatures called men. They fell prey to countless dangers. The mare nursed them. Her milk fed them. Strong they grew.
And the new rune-right items are there as well for Geralt to choose from. But all in all, the foreign disruption to a phenotypically homogeneous life in the Northern Kingdoms benefits no one quite as much as it does supposed evil incarnate Gaunter O'Deam, if that's indeed what he actually is, and we will of course get to that later on. Knowing what we know of CD Projekt Red's present hiring practices, what can we make of this curious take on diversity and its impact from such a, for lack of a better way to put it, woke-looking, purple-haired development team? Are these stunning and brave, HR-friendly employees only working on Cyberpunk, while the Witcher crew remains the same sane bunch we have all assumed them to be since the 2015 release of The Witcher? Or did they drop the ball here and not realize the implications of their storyline? I mean, assuming I'm not way off here, and not entirely missing the point of the Ophiri presence in the Northern Kingdoms, it would seem to be quite antithetical to their presumed worldview, where diversity is our strength, right? Does the development team have traitors in its ranks who are not anti-white and are dropping major Easter eggs? I suppose we can only speculate, but interesting enrichment results are interesting, if you ask me. As always, the characters in this game are the main reason it's so enjoyable. They are always larger than life, fully fleshed out with all their numerous virtues and flaws, and expertly portrayed by the voice actors. Even the seeming throwaway ones, like the Borsodi brothers, are really captivating. If I have one complaint, it's that I didn't get to interact more with them, especially Ewald, who was one of the coolest characters in the whole series in my humble opinion, right up there with the fascinating, ever-scheming menace and foil that is Dijkstra. I hope I get a chance to meet him again in Blood and Wine or some future sequel. That said, I want to focus on Shani, because despite coming across as a bit of a boring plain Jane or even a dead fish, who is quite a contrast in many ways to Geralt's usual firebrand sorceress girlfriends, I think she's got some interesting depth and dilemmas inherent to her character that may not be obvious at first glance. And did I say she ain't Geralt's usual type in a wooden enough manner right there? Anyway, she is nowhere near as self-absorbed as someone like Kira Metz, as cantankerous as Yen or Fringilla, or as pretty yet passive-aggressive and calculating as Triss or Cantarella. When all is said and done, she's kinda just a regular girl with very little baggage and decent but not striking looks. That said, she isn't without her complications and problems. First of all, how old is she? I'd have to say early to mid-30s, which in the medieval setting of Geralt's world makes her almost a barren old crone. But she isn't a barren old crone, of course, like sorceresses such as Yen or Triss are, who use magic to appear young and beautiful. At least you would think that's the story behind Yen or Triss. Again, if you watched my Wild Hunt review, you will know that I mentioned the intro scene where the sorceress, who's old and warty and your typical witch, becomes young and beautiful. And I have to assume the implication is that's what most or all sorceresses do. But Shani is just a regular woman. And therein lies the biggest problem for Geralt anyway. This game pulls no punches when it comes to Shani's story. The long wedding quest makes it obvious that she, despite being a normal gal or the girl next door, so to speak, is running out of biological time due to the fact that she's way too committed to her career and missing out on many of life's joys for the fairer sex. She's unmarried, has no children, and really doesn't even have a single love interest besides a dead guy's all-too-eager ghost in Vladimir, and Geralt, who's a sterile witcher. And that's the elephant in the room here for Shani, isn't it? She's already old by her own world standards and rapidly approaching the age of female infertility. So why is she messing around with a guy who clearly can't give her any kids? Is Geralt some last ride on the old carousel? For her, before she settles down and finds a husband and forms a family, she seems to be an analog for the real-world, independent, career-oriented boss girls who don't need no man, until they realize too late that they actually do. She's heading toward becoming a crazy Oxenfurt cat lady at breakneck speed. To be fair, Geralt should know better as well and not get involved with her, and this seems to be the unspoken dialogue between the two the whole time they interact. Both of them seem to know they can't quite ever become a true couple, so they just kind of leave it unsaid and drift apart without any true closure. I wouldn't be surprised if a future Shani cameo has her married to some Redanian lieutenant or captain or whatever, with whom she has had about 5 kids and has settled down on some farm somewhere. Her dedication to her healer profession is laudable and everything. She's taking care of the wounded soldiers, which is great. But she's clearly not a contented woman. Something has her donning that constant sourpuss and that sort of melancholy affectation that she always has. And the game makes it obvious what that is, which is once again quite a departure from what you would expect from the aforementioned CD Projekt Red development team.
Who are you, really?
Gaunter O'Dim, also known...
Not what I'm asking.
Ah, so you'd rather know what it is I do. In brief, I give folk what they ask for. You might say, I simply grant their wishes.
You're not human, that's clear. So what are you? A demon? A djinn?
Do you really wish to know?
Yes.
No, Geralt. You don't. This one time I shall spare you and not grant your wish. All who have learned my true name are now either dead or have met an even worse fate. Yet I still need you.
I curse the day I first set eyes upon the man. He appeared at my doorstep one day, offering a sack of gold were I only to find out who Gaunter O'Dim is and how to get rid of him. I agreed. Such matters are my speciality. And I needed the coin. I pored over countless tomes, delved into obscure incidents and analysed folk legends. I went so far as to travel to Nilfgaard, the library there, where at last I hit upon the mysterious entity's trail. There are records of encounters dating back thousands of years in many cultures under many names, but always as evil incarnate. In this land...
So that's the game's breakdown of what Gaunter might be. That's as many hints as it cares to give you. So that's it then, right? Gaunter's just the demonic incarnation of evil. And we're done here. I can tell you to tune into the next episode or the next upload and we can all go about our business. Well, if that's the case, what's up with his initials? And why is he granting backfiring wishes? Aren't demons supposed to simply possess people they slowly destroy while doing battle with the exorcists trying to save those people? Sure, some of them aspire to become malicious deities and even amass hosts of worshippers, but what's up with that almost jocular, mischievous side to Gaunter? Often he comes across as impish and even bordering on helpful and paternal, rather than demonic. He did, after all, offer Geralt and the other wedding guests some pretty sound advice, if you remember. I think I speculated during gameplay that Gaunter might be some overpowered djinn or something along those lines, but that was before I had completed the game, and more importantly, before I had put any serious thought into the matter. It's hard to do a deep intellectual dive into such things while you're trying to avoid getting killed by 30th level monsters all the time. Your train of thought tends to get interrupted. But now as I type away at this narration script for an eventual recording, I'm struck by how his multifaceted nature and rather daunting powers suggest something grander in scale than just a lowly demon. He can appear and disappear at whim, stop time, grant wishes, fly, or at least walk right out of the very sky, and so on. He seems to earn his initials at every stage of the adventure. But then, if he is indeed a god, which god would that be? Every time I thought about this before writing this review, I kept coming back to Loki, due to how mischievous Gaunter seems. And there is the fact that Skelligers worship a Loki, but they seem to revere him as a benevolent deity, and Hearts of Stone, regrettably for me, a big fan of Skellige, does not require you to ever visit the place. So that sort of rules out Skellige's Loki and the Nordic Loki as well, because that's the wrong pantheon, right? All of the runes in the game are named after Slavic gods, not Nordic ones like Loki. And the trouble is, I don't know much at all about Slavic gods. So off to the internet I had to go. And what became increasingly apparent to me is that Loki really has no clear analog among Slavic gods. And the closest thing to him is Velis, the god of the dead or the underworld. I even tried to make the mark Gaunter burned into Geralt's face fit the one on the Velis runestone, but that doesn't quite work out. Still, everything about Velis, a trickster underworld god, suggests that he might indeed search for human souls and attempt to trick people into offering theirs up. Velis is even connected to mercantilism in Russia, if I have the story behind his mythology correct. And Gaunter claims to have once been a mirror salesman, before the war between the Northern Realms and Nilfgaard ruined his trade, hence his nickname of Master Mirror. So Gaunter is Velis, therefore, and we finally cracked the mirror code, if you'll excuse the pun. Now, I'm not the first to suggest this. Well, the astute among you will see that there's a major problem with drawing this conclusion. Sure, since the game is based on tales written by a Polish author, the Slavic pantheon from our world is referenced in The Witcher 3 via the names of Geralt's runestones and such, but Geralt's world is not our own, after all. It's a fictional one with a host of divine beings all its own, like Melitele, Lilbani, the aforementioned Loki, Lilith, and on and on and on. And paltry few jump out at you as clear options for Gaunter's true identity. There are a couple possibilities, though, so let's go over them. The first is an evil god from the eastern lands of Hochland and Zarkania named Baal-Zebuth, who is clearly an analog for Beelzebub, or Baal-Zevuv, the classic demon from the Old Testament. I believe he was actually a Philistine god that the followers of the Abrahamic religions decided to turn into a demon due to his contesting with Yahweh. The difficulty here is, although I've never personally come across any reference to him while playing The Witcher 3, you would think our blind ponerologist, no, not blind bonerologist, you mental gutter dwellers, ponerologist, or one who studies evil, Professor Shakeslocks, would have been aware of the cult that worships Baal-Zebuth, and would have maybe not only mentioned it to Geralt, but researched this avenue for clues to breaking Gaunter's hold over his victims. None of that ever happens, though. Professor Shakeslock doesn't mention Baal-Zebuth at all. So I'm going to cross that one off the list. And that only leaves one rather odd and mysterious choice that I will slaughter the pronunciation for. Earhedes, an apparent demon god with very loose affiliations to Geralt's world. This creature, being, entity, whatever you want to call it, it only appears in a tabletop game with all kinds of Witcher references in it that Sapkowski made at some point in the past. What I like about this option is the demon god title, which ticks off all the major Gaunter boxes, and the obscurity. If most denizens of the Northern Realms would never have heard of this evil entity, then most likely it would never have come up during Professor Shakelock's delving into Gaunter's origins. And let's recall the transformation Gaunter begins to undergo when Geralt finally bests him in the final mirror game. It is indeed demonic looking and sounding, as one would assume Earhedes' true form would look like and sound like. And it does remind one of Evil Incarnate, as the professor contends Gaunter is. I think, however, no matter which evil being we choose for Gaunter's real identity, he undoubtedly represents our own diabolical elite in the real world. And I'm not going to spell this one out for everyone, or get into it too much. All I will do is harken back to this review's mention of Geralt's world becoming more diverse, and Gaunter seizing on the opportunities that offers. Well, do the elite of our own world benefit from diversity, while the average folk suffer from its negative impacts, such as driving down wages and causing tension and strife in middle and lower class communities? And are our elite not granting us backhanded wishes all the time? I will simply leave it at that and leave you to ponder it. All right, so maybe all of that interpretive babble didn't quite make it clear for you how much I like playing this rather thought-provoking DLC. So let me spell it out for you. I still love The Witcher 3, even when it doesn't let me visit beloved Skellige. And Blood and Wine, here we come very soon. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next upload.